headmaster. So if your parents help you bond with reality, you become an empiricist. If your parents help you bond with, or demand that you bond with abstractions, categories, right? A friend of mine, single mother. Single mother took him to extended family. Extended family was actually pretty decent, according to his reports. I never met him, but extended family was pretty decent. And they were staying over at an aunt and uncle's place, his aunt and uncle's place. And down at breakfast, his uncle said, "Hey, I noticed you left the toothpaste cap off the tube, brother. Do you mind fixing it? Do you mind getting it?" Kid ran upstairs and screwed on the tube, the top of the toothpaste tube, right? The cap. This enraged his mother for years, because his mother would yell at him, scream at him, bully him, and would say, when Uncle so-and-so said that you had left the cap off the toothpaste tubes, you flew up the stairs to fix it. Why don't you listen to me? I'm family. Right, so the mom had the category adult family means gleeful, happy obedience. Right? I am an adult. I am family. You obeyed an adult who was family. Everyone should obey family adults, and happily too, right? Your uncle was an adult and a family member. You obeyed him happily. I am an adult and a family member. Therefore, you should obey me. Right? So she was demanding the same level of respect and obedience as if she was the uncle who didn't yell at him or screech at him or bully him. So she demanded that he obey a category that she inhabited, and she felt it monstrously unjust that he would not obey her in the way he obeyed his uncle. Happily, easily. Now, she didn't go to the uncle and say, well, how do you treat him that he listens to you? I should change my behavior to match the empirical actions that produce my son's conformity to you, to your requests, your preferences, right? No. She took refuge in a category and demanded obedience based upon that category. Like in The West Wing, when Josiah Bartlett says, you respect the office, not the individual. You respect the category, not the person. You respect the ideal, not the empirical actions. All right, so let's get to the radical subjectivism. Everything might be unreal. You blink, things disappear. Everything is radically subjective. Could be a brain in a tank controlled by...
Well, it's this poisoning the will. I'm not necessarily saying what he says is incorrect, but it's just this, okay, they think everything is sort of up in the air and everything, you can't trust anything. Why not try to go with the argument, right? Try to follow the structure of the arguments rather than throwing shit around. Then that would be a more approachable attitude to judging other people's philosophy, right? My approach is deconstructing sentence by sentence, basically as I'm doing here, right? Or at least something that is... I'm not jumping on every sentence, but I am trying to look for the arguments there are there, right? And by doing it this way, I usually end up not really finding anything, right? When I try to find the argument, I might find an argument, but then the argument is not connected to any prior arguments that should have followed from some kind of first principles or, deeper level metaphysics, where there's a ground floor where you can start off and say you can always, trace the arguments back to that. Never. I can't remember any time where I come across somebody who's actually arguing this structured, cohesive way. No, what I do get is something akin to what Stefan Molyneux is doing here. He's just throwing around, trying to groom you into a certain understanding or conclusion before he attempts to do some kind of presentation of the arguments, right? And that is basically sophist in nature, and I really don't like it, right? Now, I might agree or disagree with what the term you're using, a radical subjectivism, whatever, right? You have to get down to some kind of philosophical argumentation structure that follows a certain set of, you could say, argumentative rules, or, that where it's sort of obvious that you can point out there's a flaw in this philosophy here or a flaw in the philosophy there or whatever, right? I don't see him doing that. I see him just throwing around his subjective opinion and feelings and disgust and so on between the lines, right? That might just be me, right? But that's how I see it at this point, right? And I'm not saying this is sort of a one-off. This is generally the pattern, both for Stefan Molyneux, but usually also for everyone else that I have come across during the last decade, right?
A demon, where the hell does that come from? Well, that comes from, we've got good parenting, empiricism, abusive parenting, idealism, neglect.
Oh man, God damn it, right? This is disgusting, right? If you don't even bother to bring on the quotes or the philosophy, but you jump into some kind of psychologizing that I don't even need to look at the arguments. I can just classify these people as having bad childhood, so I don't even need to bother looking at the philosophy, right? This is fucking stupid, man. And it illuminates his lack of sensitivity to actually trying to deal with philosophy that might not actually align with his own, but he can sort of reflect over it and actually show it sufficient amount of respect, because it might be, as is the case with myself, for instance, right? I might be incorrect in my own philosophy. His conclusion might not be cut in stone, even though he might believe that. And therefore, because he believes they're cut in stone, everybody else are crazy who are pushing any other kind of philosophy, right? And in this way, he's sort of cornering himself into this little box of I'm being right. And he can't get out of it if he's not sufficiently open to looking at the actual philosophy rather than just pushing his, prejudice.
Neglect is what leads to solipsism, to narcissism. Neglect. So when you are neglected as a child, nobody leads you to reality.
If you haven't bumped into my ideas of this level of metaphysics before, maybe I should make a short statement on it, right? That it can be quite difficult to find a starting point in philosophy, because when you start out, if you start out philosophizing and trying to get through it, right? And you realize the importance of philosophy for your own life, basically. That's what you have, the unexamined life is not worth living, and so on, Socrates and Plato, right? Then where do you start? Because it seems like there might be if you are winding yourself down in philosophy and understanding how to approach it, it seems there's a logical structure, or there might be a way at least to approach doing philosophy is to have a starting point and then argue your way stepwise through everything until all you could possibly philosophize about have been dealt with, right? Otherwise, it might very quickly, I think that one should be suspicious of just cherry picking various stuff here and there and just create this tapestry of whatever you want to be the case. And then just sort of, oh, I don't want to look at that. Oh, I don't want to look at that. But I like this one. Let me keep this one, right? If you go down to some kind of basic structure and try to encompass everything, and then, classify it and define it and create axioms and so on, building on top of that, building on top of that, building on top, always making sure that you're not cherry picking, but creating good, solid dichotomies and good arguments that are based on the prior argument, that is based on the prior argument, that is based on that ultimate ground floor, which I would call the reduction base, right? You might find a better term, but that's how I use it, right? Okay, so if you have that approach that I've just illuminated here, right? What would that starting point be? Well, if I am going to not just think of it, but I'm going to end up in a situation where I'm dealing with ethics, right? Ethics is not about yourself only. It is also about, it is actually, you could say, about certain aspects of interacting with other human beings, right? But before you get to the idea of other human beings, there's a lot of ground floor or ground level philosophy you need to do in order to even get to the point where you said, okay, by somebody else or another individual, I mean this or that or the other, right? That will eventually pop out or should possibly pop out of your metaphysics and knowledge, right? Metaphysics and epistemology. At least your metaphysics, I would say, right? Maybe not knowledge. Because you possibly need to settle that before you start on epistemology, which is philosophy behind knowledge. Okay, so if you want to go there's a lot of things you need to do before you get there, right? And if you need to engage with other people, it seems like a good idea to be able to agree upon what is going on. If there's an external world where these other individuals are somehow, existing, you could say, right? That what you mean by an external world, what you mean by existing, what you mean by agreeing, and what you mean by all these things, right? It needs to be something that you can agree upon. Now, if you need to agree upon something, everybody that you need to agree with, which is basically all other, you could say, human beings in this sense, right? Other beings that you should agree with. They should be able to, by their own accord, to do whatever it takes in order to get to the idea of existence upon which you can agree. How would that be possible? Well, the only thing I can come up with is that the ground floor has to be based on that which you use in order to get to that existence. And that would be, in my opinion, the five senses, or the qualia of those five, what we call the five senses, right? It's the sounds, it's the tastes, it's the feels, it's the smells, and it's the colors, right? Color, sound, taste, feel, and smell, right? This is what you have to work with when you think about it, right? Let's say you could come up with something that you say, yeah, but I can refer to this aspect of my existence that is not related to these five qualia, right? Sound, smell, taste, and so on. I don't think you can. Because even if you have a stomach pain, right? If you are, it's all some kind. If you're hungry, or everything, in my opinion, can be traced back to this. You wouldn't have a stomach pain if there wasn't anything about your experiences that related to. Maybe it's sort of the stomach pain arrives so you can imagine what did I eat last time? Oh, I ate that smelly corpse. Maybe I shouldn't eat smelly corpse. The smelly corpse is based on an experience of tastes and so on and so on. You can always trace everything back to the qualia, in my opinion. So that's why I would argue the ground floor, the reduction base, is the qualia, right? So, when you have the qualia, all you have, in my opinion, is the sound, the color, the taste, and so on, right? And then you might start to think about, okay, but, is there some kind of structure to these colors and sounds and so on? There seem to be, in my opinion. First of all, they seem to be in something I would call space, right? And also that there seemed to be something going on in my mind, with my mind or my awareness of that experiences, those colors and sounds and so on, seems to sometime attach some kind of you could call meaning or identification or clarification. I don't want to put on a particular word, right? But I need to express it in order to communicate it to you, right? For instance, elephant, right? Now, when you refer to elephant, you are not referring directly to an experience. You are referring to what I would call a concept, but the mind has identified, using that concept, has identified a particular instance of, let's say, elephant among these qualia, right? You are having this qualia, and then the mind says elephant, so to say, right? So there's something going on there that might be needed to be dealt with, right? Another thing that usually comes up, and that's very rarely, if at all, argued cohesively, it's the idea of an external world. Now, what is it about that experience I just talked about that would make you say there is something outside this experience, right? It's colors, it's sounds, and so on, and there are these cognitions called elephant. It's all part of the experience, right? There's nothing about, in my opinion, about the experience as itself that necessitates there must be something outside that experience. That is a leap based on prejudice, in my opinion, right? You have to either be able to argue for it based on those experiences you have, which I find to be impossible. But because I'm so prejudiced towards this idea of an external world, and if I want to base my philosophy on it, I need to do something, right? If I want to go that route of dealing with some kind of external world, I need to deal with it in a way that is rigid and philosophical and so on, right? And in my opinion, the only way you can do it is stating it axiomatically by saying, I can't reason my way to it purely on my experiences, which is the deepest level I have into whatever it might have, be based on, if it's based on anything, which is not clear from the experience itself, right? I have to state it axiomatically by saying, I am going with the idea that there is an external world. I can do that. It's my fucking philosophy. And the point is, if you don't agree with me, you know exactly where to look, right? Look at the fucking axioms in my philosophy. If you disagree with those axioms, fine. I respect your judgment. I respect your philosophy. I am showing respect for other kinds of philosophy who wouldn't potentially agree with me. Now, I would be going in that direction following my axiom, right? If you don't want to, fine, then let's agree to disagree, right? What I usually hear from philosophers is, This is the way it is because I have come up with it, right? And there's something wrong with you, right? There's something with your childhood. There's something with your parents. There's something wrong with you, and that's why you're not following my brilliant philosophy. Rather than saying, I can't reason my way to this, or at least within the limitation of my philosophy, I'm reaching a point now where I can't reason any further without establishing this axiom. And the axiom basically is there to let you know I am doing this. If you're just jumping into it like, I guess that I have to do it, you're not being good at philosophy, right? Or just telling people you have a bad childhood, right? As Stefan Molyneux does here. It's stupid, man, right? It's just conjecture, right? It's just sort of, I guess I can use this to push my own agenda, right? Just by labeling these are idiots who are crazy, and therefore I'm right, sort of, right? It doesn't work. I hope my sort of quick and dirty little presentation of my metaphysics makes sense to you. Otherwise, please leave a comment below or join the Discord board link below. If you want to discuss it and there's something that doesn't make sense to you, please let me know, right? Okay, let's head in.
Nobody explains things to you. You have to raise yourself. You make up words, you make up fantasy stories, you make up ideas, you make up pictures, you do any number of things wherein your own mind becomes your primary reference. You can't go exploring reality as a little kid. It's dangerous out there. You can't just go and, hey, I'm just going to go and handle bugs in the backyard, and I'm just going to go and stay out all day in the sun. I'm just going to pick up these little creepy crawlies and see what they are. I'm going to stick forks in holes in the walls and see what happens, right? I mean, the kids who had those impulses didn't live. They didn't last, right? They died. Or were crippled. Or were scarred and lost mating opportunities. So you can't go explore the world. You can't go explore the world if you're neglected. So what do you explore? Your imagination, your own thoughts, your own mind. That's what you explore. At least the world of forms, the Platonic world of forms, the ideal world, is somewhere out there. It's not just in your own mind. Your own mind contains those forms, but they exist outside, beyond empiricism, just as the virtues of your parents exist outside of the categories beyond the empiricism of their brutality. But if you're neglected, there really isn't any out there. There really isn't any out there. And that's a wild state of mind to be in. When you are neglected.
There was something I forgot to mention around the metaphysics, right? Now, if you establish axiomatically that there is an outside, right? Now, you can say there is an outside axiomatically, but that doesn't mean all of a sudden you have access to that outside, right? Because what you have access to is that sort of experience, which is now the inside, right? So if you are saying that you now have an access to an outside and you can tell me what it is based on your experiences, then you're sort of violating the whole idea of this dichotomy you just created, or you jumped into, prejudicially, right? Which is the axiom Stefan Molyneux apparently is working from, that there is this outside given to him and he knows all about it, right? If the point of the contradiction that is built into what is now known as materialism, right, is that if you say there's an outside and you are talking about it, what are you referring to in that which you're talking about, right? Are you referring to colors and sounds and so on? Well, that's on the inside, right? That's your experiences. You created that outside world, which is sort of at least something beyond your own experiences. Otherwise, it would be a part of your experiences, and there wouldn't be an outside then, because it would be a part of your experiences, right? So if there's something beyond your experiences, what are you referring to when you're talking about it, right? Then you have to be careful. You have to basically say, I can't get to it. So the whole point is, why do you need that external world? Well, I act as if my experiences are representations of it, right? Because they can't both be the thing itself and a representation, right? If it's which is an experience. If the experience is on the inside, then I can't say that the same experience is also on the outside, right? It must be something different from experience. Otherwise, I am invalidating my own dichotomy I just created by creating that outside, right? So if you're saying the outside is also colors and sounds and so on, you are violating the basis of that distinction between these two realms, right? And if you say it's outside, it can't be an experience. Because if it's outside your experience, it's not an experience, right? If it was an experience, it would be on the inside of that dichotomy. So this paradox there is in this, when you establish this axiom, you have to deal with. You have to deal with this paradox. And if you don't, you are not sufficiently sensitive to the problems or identifying the problems that is just, right in front of you. And those who venture into what is usually known as idealism identify this problem, right? Those who stay in materialism, they push it away and call it basically the hard problem of consciousness. And then there are those who don't even understand that there is a problem. And that would be someone like Stefan Molyneux, right? Who thinks that people don't understand him now, just like Jesus. Father, they don't know what they're doing. In 500 years, they will all cherish me, right?
Did you become the primary reference of your own empiricism? The empiricism that you inhabit is within your own mind. It's within your own mind. You explore your thoughts, you explore your imagination, you explore your dreams.
He implicitly between them, when you try to interpret between the lines here, right? He is talking, he has established as if it's just given to him without him even realizing it, right? He works as if it's settled. It's not even something you have to deal with, right? This dichotomy, it is implicit in the way he formulates these kinds of thinkings here, right? Or thinking, whatever you want to call it, right? It is mandatory, in my opinion, if you want to understand another philosopher, you have to dig in and see how they approach this thing, right? Because if they don't approach it the right way, in my opinion, the rest of their philosophy should be considered invalid, right? Because it's based on some foundational problem that is either not dealt correctly with or not even identified, which is the case with Stefan Molyneux here, right?
You create imaginary worlds.
And also, I might add, this is why he has to go into all these sort of psychologizing, right? He simply cannot understand that there might actually be some philosophy grounding in this, and not just people coming up with some weird stuff to cushion their weird family structure, right? Or their childhood indoctrination or whatever, right? But there actually might be some problem that these philosophers are trying to deal with, right? And Stefan Molyneux be so idiotically stupid that he can't even see it, right? That's a fucking big problem for him, but also for all the people that he's all dragging along like the stupid Pied Piper, right?
And in the creation of those imaginary worlds do not exist unless you are picturing them. And then they exist within your own mind. And then when you are distracted, they cease to exist. If you have an imaginary friend, that imaginary friend does not exist, but when you are talking and playing with that imaginary friend exists within your mind. And the reason you create an imaginary friend is because you lack connection in the real world. You lack interaction with others, so you make up interactions. Of course. Of course. All senses are heightened when one sense is destroyed. When connection is absent, imagination takes over and imaginary connections are made. I mean, one of the reasons that my daughter and I loved role-playing is because she was an only child, and I knew, of course, and very much enjoyed it as well, the process of creating social relationships in her imagination. Now, of course, she did have friends and so on, but, you need more than, as an only child, you need much more interaction with your parents, and one of the ways we did it was through that. So, I'm a brain in a tank whose every stimuli is controlled by an external force, probably malevolent. Well, that is children being forced into the dank movie theater of their own imaginations by a lack of outside stimuli. You follow? Of course you do. Isolated, neglected.
What is an outside stimuli, right? Okay, yes, if you're locked in your basement all your life, you will sort of lack, a development of your sensual faculties and your cognitive apparatus and whatever, right? But I don't think this is the case with all these philosophers. David Hume was a very reasonable man who was, started in university at 12 years old and, very critical and very, being his own self and very empiricist and so on, right? Is possibly the next philosopher is going to deal with. So it's like, I don't buy this shit, right? He can fabulate all he wants about, bad psychology. And I'm not going to just take that as a given to slap on all these philosophers that he wants to talk about, presumably, right?
Children neglect is one of the worst forms of abuse. There's a demon somewhere out there beyond my stimuli that is provoking all of these hallucinations within.
But that's not radical subjectivism, so to the best of my understanding. That would be Cartesian doubt, wouldn't it? A thought experiment within Cartesian doubt. It's just one big gumbo, this. You don't understand what they're dealing with, right? Yes, there might be some of them that are half crazy. I don't know. But you don't understand the basics here, mate, right? You need to address this. You need to get to it. Otherwise, you will be screwed. Nobody will. They will, they would avoid bad philosophy like this, right? You're not going to impress anybody with this because you don't get the point, man.
Well, that's a neglectful parent. The parent who's depressed, the parent who's absent, the parent who's lazy, the parent who won't interact. Well, and of course now kids go online, they video games and other things, right? All of that occurs.
But isn't that the childhood he had? So I shouldn't trust him. Even though he has got some other kind of... Well, he's basically saying, well those people who got this at their childhood, they never, grew up and became a rigid philosopher by their own accord, by own standards, right? But he did, because he's so special. He clawed his way out of this, mania, this craziness, right? So he is the Jesus of philosophy, therefore, right? All the others, no, they stayed in their craziness from childhood and all the way through their philosophy until they died, and they tried to push this crazy philosophy on everybody else, right? Bullshit.
And so the creativity that comes from a lack of external stimuli, and we know this from isolation tanks and so on, and people get very vivid hallucinations if deprived from external stimuli too much, and the brain steps in to provide stimuli, but external stimuli is absent. And so the idea that you are your own universe, that everything is an illusion inflicted upon you by an external, absent, malevolent force, well, that's a neglectful parent or parents, a neglectful society, a neglectful environment.
Or society, what is that? Isn't that a category? Can a category neglect somebody? Right? You fucking moron, man. You are directly contradicting your own statement earlier about these categories and not being existing and so on, right? Now you're referring to society that can, do something, whatever, just like a person or something like that, right? It's fucking stupid, man, right?
You to substitute imagination for interaction. Forces you to substitute imagination for interaction. It's a perfect mirror, you understand? Things don't exist when I don't look at them. This comes from a childhood that's abominably neglected.
No. It seems like when we're dealing with this kind of, when you close your eyes, the tree in the forest and all this, it's a lack of ability to say, I don't know. Learn to say, I don't know. And accept that that is often the only right answer to a question, right? I don't know. You don't have to know. And this fetish with I have to know makes some people end up in saying, you can't know it. Or it's not the case because they can't be certain that they know, so they are going to reject it instead, right? Because this fetish of certainty. Learn to say, I don't know. Possibly the most important answer in philosophy. In anybody's philosophy, in my opinion. If you close your eyes and you do not experience elephant, right? You no longer have empiricism. Because the basis of empiricism is your senses, right? If you close your eyes, you no longer experience elephant, right? You could maybe hear some sounds and so on. Okay, we could discuss the gray areas there, right? Settle on some kind of, principle there. But you're not experiencing elephant. If, let's say there's no sounds there, right? And no smell. And you close your eyes, then there's no elephant, right? In your experience. Now, is there still an elephant just because you do not experience it? Well, you can neither say there is or there isn't for the exact reason that you do not have empiricism, right? You do not have senses. What you have to say in that case is, I don't know, right? I don't know if there's an elephant. Saying that, yes, there is an elephant, even when I do not have empiricism, because I'm basing my philosophy on empiricism, that is bullshit, right? But because you do not have empiricism, you cannot deny the elephant either, right? So the lack of empiricism leads to the inevitable answer, which is, I don't fucking know. Learn it. Learn to say it, right?
Where, as you get older, of course, you realize that you had an imaginary friend. That imaginary friend did not exist when you weren't thinking of that imaginary friend. Now, it did exist within your own mind while you were imagining that friend. Just as dreams do exist within our own mind, but not in reality. So the idea that things don't exist when you're not looking at them, well, the child, in a sense, doesn't exist when the parent doesn't interact with the child. Children learn through interaction. And in the world, of course, you need a balance between internal stimuli and external stimuli. If you focus solely on external stimuli as best you can, you empty out inside. If you focus solely on internal stimuli, you can't relate to other people. That's the spectrum thing, right? A little bit, I imagine. So your parents are the demons that are forcing you or creating within you this inner fantasy world. Everything that's within you is the result of manipulation by an external force. That external force, of course, is your parent, and your parent is a kind of demon for abandoning you to your own stimuli. Now, we do have a lot of people who are radical subjectivists, and that's because they are, your external stimuli is absent, in which case your imagination tends to go pretty florid, or your external stimuli is just too much. External stimuli is there's just a too muchness to it. And then you retreat within your own mind, but that's not you reaching out to recreate stimuli that's absent. That's you retreating from excessive stimuli that's around. So if we look at these three philosophical perspectives, empiricism, idealism, subjectivism, all good.
Well, he is misrepresenting what this is, right? Empiricism is not a metaphysics, right? If he's doing epistemology, talking about idealism is invalid, right? If he's doing metaphysics, talking about empiricism is invalid. Empiricism is a part of knowledge. It is not about metaphysics, you fucking moron, man. I mean, somebody stop this guy, man. Aren't there anybody in this congregation of people that, these half-blind, the blind people that follow this Pied Piper, who can say, no, this doesn't work? Right? What are you doing, man? Right? Whenever there's a philosophy I don't agree with, it's because they have bad childhood, right? Holy shit, man, right? Isn't that a sign of bad childhood, that approach to philosophy? Oh, man, right?
Goes back to the parenting. Now, of course, we can't resurrect these philosophers and say, hey, how was your childhood, and test this theory. We can, of course, talk about it honestly in our own lives and ask people around us and so on. Yeah, you ask a subjectivist, what was your parent like?
Oh, good for you, right? So we can't double check whether you're actually right on your, conjecture here, right? So you can, fabulate all you want because they're long dead, these people.
What was your childhood like? What was your...
Maybe there might be somebody who's able to dig out something about these particular people, men's childhood. I don't know, right?
How are you parented? It's going to be neglect. Or,
But if anybody else were to dig up something from Stefan Molyneux' childhood, that wouldn't look particularly nice either, right? So if childhood is any bearing on the quality of your philosophy, Stefan Molyneux' philosophy should be, parked under crazy people, right?
The overstimulation of really early daycare and so on. And you ask the idealist, what was your parenting like? Well, I love my parents. Why? Well, they're my parents. And you have this challenge, right? So when I said, these many, many years ago, that it might be wise to evaluate your parents as individual actors rather than within the category parents, that one of the reasons I got such intense blowback was because I was challenging people's addiction to abstractions, to the category. Well, my mother has value because she's my mother. She's in the category called mother, therefore she has value. Wow. So I was saying to them that what you think of as a bond is actually the scar tissue of trauma. And of course, I wasn't aware of all of this at the time, but looking back, it all sort of makes sense, right? You have an addiction to the categorization as the result of...
I think that this might not be, the full picture he's painting here, right? I think that children in some way or another, this might be sort of slightly rambling, right? But they want to be able to classify this person as a parent because that is putting some kind of pressure. It's some kind of responsibility. If your child were calling you by your first name rather than father and mother, right? You would find it a bit strange, I think. It's like they're trying to disconnect from you, right? The father and child, and mother and child, is a particular mental construct basically for children. not for parents. Now, parents go around ordering their children around if they're little soldiers or something like that. I think that's backward, right? The father and mother is a label that children put on the parents in order to keep them responsible for their child's life, right? Children so badly want a family and a parenting, and the idea of that, which is a mental connection between these persons in this relation, right? I mean, you're talking about fathering and child rearing and bringing up, homeschooling. These are all concepts. These are all categories. These are all abstractions, ideas. They're not existence, right? Peaceful parenting is a category, right? It's an idea. The whole being, the whole nature of your life is dealing with these kinds of ideas. You're not dealing with colors and sounds and so on. These are just necessary experiences in order to get to, for instance, elephant or child or bicycle or tomato or pizza or whatever, right? So this wall, there's this magnificent external world that is perfect. And if you're thinking too much about what's going on in your mind, you're crazy, right? This is never going to fly for him, right? Because people are more wedded to their ideas and their mental constructs in their personal relations and so on, than that you can argue away from using this appeal to this external world you actually do not have access to, right? And if you think you have access to it, how the hell do you have access to it, right? The paradox I referred to in when I described the metaphysics just before. If there's an external world, how do you get to it? Is it an experience? Well, then it's not an external world then, right? And if it's not an experience, what the hell is it then? How does it manifest? Where does it come from? How do you arrive at it, right? Does it have a back door and entering into you or what? Is it a sort of a sixth sense or what the hell is going on, right? You need to address this, mate.
Abuse, most likely. And when you challenge people's subjectivism, their relativism, then you're saying...
Would you mind defining what relativism and subjectivism is? Why are you using two words just like that? Why just not stick to one word, right? Why keep piling words on top of another word, right? What is subjectivism? What is relativism, right? What is it? Please explain, right? I might have my ideas, but that might not exactly align with your ideas. So it would be nice when you start to use these terms that you are actually defining them and describing what you mean. And then when you define that, you're using some other term, right? And don't you need to define that term? Well, yes, of course you do, right? So there's sort of a regression of definitions back to what? Is it an infinite regression? Hopefully not. There must be some ground floor, which I spoke of just before, where you end up and saying, this is where it stops, right? I can't go any further than this. This is my reduction base, right? Now, if when you do philosophy and you end up trying to describe something using this reduction base and it all goes haywire and you think, what the hell is going on? Is this philosophy? It might be because there's something dysfunctional about that reduction base. It's not the right reduction base, right? Okay.
You live in a universe of you because the universe of others was absent. You were neglected as a child. That's it's one thing when people come to their own realizations. It's quite another when the Band-Aid gets ripped off by a stranger and the Band-Aid is their skin, so to speak. So I kind of get that now, but that's the lens that I want to look at going forward. And of course, I'd love to get your thoughts about this, and I'll post this on various platforms, freedomain.locals.com.
You have all my thoughts here, right? And the rant you presented a few months ago, I also deconstructed that one. So you have all my comments that you need. I could possibly give you some more comments, but go back and, listen to all my deconstructions of your books, your 3 of your books, and a lot of your podcasts where you spout this, that, and the other, right? So there you have it, all for free, out of my, courtesy.
Being the primary one, I'd love to get your thoughts on this. And tell me about your...
Really? Do you really, right? Really? It sounds so... I'm so open, yes. But if you don't like my UPB, I'm going to attack you. If you don't like my metaphysics, I'm going to mute you out of the conversation, right?
Thoughts, your experience. I went through all 3. I went through empiricism, connection.
Really?
I went through abuse. I went through neglect.
Oh, so it was not the philosophies. Okay. Oh my fucking God, man. It's sort of, yes, philosophy is all about childhood. Yes, and if you have this childhood, you have this philosophy, done. Holy fuck, man. It's not reasoned. No, it's just emotional stuff, right? So he's basically saying that he has chosen, or he's not even chosen, he has arrived at this philosophy because he has been beaten into submission by childhood, right? That's not the best argument. I want to some fucking argument, real strict argument, and presentations and definitions and axioms and so on, in order to understand how the hell you got to this thinking, right?
And as a result, I'm quite rational. I work well with concepts and analogies. I'm very creative. Because
you're very creative.
Rationality comes from the healthy empiricism that came from my early caregiver when my mother was in hospital for depression for many, many months. And
also there was 2 months when I was 7 years old where there was somebody taking care of me, and therefore I'm not crazy.
My facility with concepts comes from going to boarding school and being demanded to be loyal to institutions, right? You've all heard, when I used to say, people would say, oh, tell me a bit about your mother, and meet people or whatever, or where do you come from, or, are you in touch with your mother, or not, are you in touch with your mother, but they would say, how are things with your mother, or what's your mother like? I'd say, oh, I haven't seen her in many years. Oh, why? Oh, she was just really mean and destructive. But she's your mother. Ooh, emphasis, mother, she's your mother. The power, you got to bond with the mother, not with the individual. It's like, well, no, but she is an individual who acted upon me, and
so maybe it's like he has come up with a solution to his crappy childhood, right? And fine. I mean, I can't, if that works for him, I mean, fine. But the problem I have is, okay, he's not satisfied with coming up with something that works for him, right? It has also to be working for you, right? He's sort of pushing it. He's trying to change the whole world to be like him because he has seen the light, right? There's no room for negotiations here. There's no room for other kinds of philosophy and opening up or anything like that. Nothing, right? He's not deconstructing anybody else. He's basically, poisoning the well here, right? This is one big, 50 minutes of poisoning the well before he dives into the next philosopher, right? This is awful. This is ridiculous, man, right? This is an asshole attitude to doing philosophy or, dealing with other philosophers, right? The only way you can take somebody else seriously is by deconstructing their philosophy. In my way, my way of doing that is doing it this way, right? Trying to take it sentence by sentence and try to piece it together and see if I can see something. And usually I can't see something. Well, go back and listen to my various deconstructions, right? And what do I get here? Somebody poisoning the well before he starts to talk about the person and potentially their philosophy, usually without quoting any of their philosophy, right? Or misquoting it or representing it in a way that fits with his agenda or something like that. This is a piece of garbage kind of history of philosophers, right? Oh.
If something's in the wrong category, you don't put it there, right? You don't put a lizard in the category of aeronautical equipment or a lamp in the capacity of HVAC, right? I would like to categorize things correctly. Yes, she is my mother. But there's no moral content to the category of mother. Categories are not actors. Categories cannot be good or evil. Which is a free speech thing too, right? Words cannot be good or evil. They're simply markers. They don't act.
Good or evil? I'm not sure where it's going with that, right? But they are, you are trying to, I mean, one of the things you talked about in your book, The Art of the Argument, was that presenting statements like this is an attempt to convince you, right? Or, another word would be manipulate you, right? Possibly. So you're doing something, right? And if you don't have a good philosophy or a fucking perfect moral principle, you're potentially being evil, right? Even without knowing it, maybe, right? Don't you have to be fucking clear about whether or not you have a good structure and a good way of arguing and things are based on good foundations in your philosophy and so on and so on and so on? Before you go out and tell people this is how you do philosophy and this is the conclusions and this is, and these philosophers are good and these are bad, and I don't buy it.
Hate speech. Well, speech can't hate. Individuals can hate, you can judge them for that. But you can judge actions, really. Actions are where morality lies, not in concepts.
So an action is an interpretation, right? An action doesn't exist. What color does an action have? What sound does it have? You're an empiricist, right? What taste does an action have? It has none of these. There are certain objects that are participating in those actions. They have these qualia, but those are the objects. Those are not the actions, right? So you can't be empirical about actions. It's an interpretation. So you're violating your own philosophy here, right? It's so fucking stupid, man.
But when people bond with concepts, it's very easy to anthropomorphize concepts and to come up with crazy things like hate speech. So, yeah, I'm curious what you think about these things and what your experience is. And if you could hit me with your collective wisdom, I would always hugely appreciate it. And looks like we're back, baby. The series will continue relatively soon. freedomain.com/donate to help out the show. Really would appreciate it. Come on, you can't get this stuff anywhere else and never will be able to.
I can't get it anywhere else. Thank God, man. It's only here that is so disgustingly bad, right?
Is after me as the example of us. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Bye.
And bye-bye to you. And we are honing in on the...
All right, so
let's just... say thank you for listening in. Thank you for coming this far. And hopefully see you in the next one. Bye-bye.